I've always believed that inspiration doesn't come when you want it. It arrives uninvited, like a stray shadow slipping through a cracked door. For weeks, maybe months, I had been waiting for that spark. The one that makes colors bleed from my brushes and breathes life into the blank canvas. But it never came. Every morning I sat in my studio surrounded by half-finished sketches and dried paint tubes, trying to force something, anything, out of myself. But the silence was deafening, the emptiness suffocating. Some days I thought maybe I was done, that my gift had faded without me noticing. Then, one rainy evening, as I was about to close up and give up again, he appeared. I didn't see him come in at first. The studio door creaked open quietly, letting in a thin thread of cold air and the smell of wet earth. I turned, startled. Standing there was a man, his clothes soaked, eyes sharp as a hawk's, and, what struck me most, a gaze so intense it felt like he was trying to reach into my mind. "Are you the artist?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. "Yes," I said cautiously. "What can I do for you?" He stepped forward, water dripping from his coat onto the wooden floor. "I want you to paint me," he said simply. "A portrait." I hesitated. There was something about him, something I couldn't quite place, that made me uneasy, but also curious. He didn't look like any client I'd ever had. No smile, no small talk, just that gaze, steady and unwavering. "Why me?" I asked, watching his face for any hint of a joke. "Because you see things differently," he said. "I need you to capture more than my face. I need you to capture what's behind it." There was a challenge in his words, a promise of mystery. Against my better judgment, I agreed. He returned the next day and every day after that. He would sit for hours, never blinking, never moving except for the faintest twitch of his mouth, like he was holding a secret too heavy to share. His eyes, oh, those eyes, were like windows to something dark and deep, something that unsettled me without explanation. I found myself drawn in, yet repelled. When I painted, I could almost feel his gaze on my skin, watching my every stroke. Sometimes I caught myself staring at him longer than necessary, as if trying to read what lay beneath his still exterior. The studio grew colder with each session. At first, I thought it was just the season changing, the creeping chill of autumn settling in. But it wasn't just cold air. It was an unnatural draft that seemed to slither through the room, brushing against my neck, whispering against the walls. I would hear faint whispers, almost like voices, barely audible and never quite forming words. At times the lights would flicker, plunging me into darkness for a heartbeat before flaring back to life. My brushes would tremble in my hand, though I convinced myself it was nothing more than nerves. One evening, as I mixed colors on my palette, a cold breath brushed my cheek. I turned sharply, but the studio was empty except for the stranger, sitting motionless in his chair, eyes fixed on me. I swallowed hard and forced my hand to steady. I told myself these were the stresses of my mind. Too much solitude, too much pressure. But something deeper gnawed at my thoughts. The painting itself began to feel alive. The stranger's eyes on the canvas seemed to shimmer under the flickering light, as if waiting, watching. Sometimes when I glanced away for a moment and then looked back, I thought I saw the painted eyes shift just slightly, tilting toward me. I told myself it was a trick of the light, or my imagination. But every time I looked, the feeling grew stronger. Days turned into weeks and the portrait slowly took shape. The man's face was perfect, every line, every shadow captured with haunting precision. But it wasn't just his face anymore. It was something more, something I couldn't name. When the final brushstroke was laid, the stranger rose without a word. I felt a sudden wave of relief mixed with an unshakable dread. He looked at the portrait, then at me, and for the first time his lips curled into a faint smile. "I will take it now," he said, voice like silk. He wrapped the canvas carefully and left, disappearing into the foggy night. After he left, the studio felt emptier than before, colder. I was alone with the painting, my masterpiece, but also my tormentor. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes on the canvas in the darkness watching me. The weight of the portrait seemed to press on my mind, filling every corner of my thoughts. The next morning I found myself drawn to the studio again, almost as if pulled by an unseen force. I stared at the painting, and just for a moment I could swear the eyes shifted ever so slightly, following me. I shook my head and whispered, "It's just a painting. It's just paint and canvas." But deep down, I knew it was not. The painting was alive, and it was watching me. I thought I had left the strange feeling behind when the stranger took the portrait away. I thought that once he was gone, the weight that had pressed on my chest would lift, that my mind would clear. But I was wrong. The first sign came that very night. I woke up suddenly drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. The room was dark, but something felt wrong, like the shadows had shifted just beyond my vision. I blinked and tried to steady my breath. Then I saw it. A face, faint, pale, watching me from the corner of the room. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was a trick of the night, a product of exhaustion and overactive imagination. But the feeling remained, the sensation of eyes cold and unblinking following my every move. In the days that followed, that feeling only grew stronger. At first it was subtle. I'd catch glimpses of something in my peripheral vision, a flicker of movement, a shifting shadow where none should be. When I turned quickly, there was nothing. Just empty walls, my worn furniture, the familiar clutter of my life. But the sense of being watched never left me. I stopped sleeping well. My dreams were invaded by the painted figure, the stranger from the portrait, his eyes darker, his expression twisted into something malevolent. "In the dreams," he whispered, though I could never quite catch the words. Sometimes he reached out to me, and I woke just before his cold fingers touched my skin. Worse still, the painted figure began to appear where he shouldn't. Reflections in windows, in my bathroom mirror, even in the shiny surface of a spoon at breakfast. Always watching. Always waiting. During the day, strange things began to happen in the studio and my home. A brush would fall off the table without explanation. Doors I was sure I had closed would stand open. Objects I never moved appeared in different places. My paintings, the ones that had once brought me comfort, now seemed warped, their faces distorted, eyes hollow. The shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling along the walls like living things. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low, I could swear I saw the painted figure standing silently behind me in the reflection of glass, or lurking just out of reach in a dark corner. I tried to tell myself these were all coincidences, tricks of the mind fueled by stress and exhaustion. But deep inside, I knew something was wrong. My friends and family noticed too. At first, they thought I was simply overwhelmed. "You need a break," they said. "You're pushing yourself too hard." They didn't see what I saw. They didn't feel the cold presence creeping into my life. My sister, visiting one afternoon, paused in the doorway of the studio, concern written across her face. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "You look different, like you haven't slept in days." I wanted to tell her about the eyes watching me, the whispers in the dark, the shifting shadows. But who would believe me? Who would understand? Instead, I forced a smile. "I'm fine," I lied, "just stressed." But the truth clawed at me. My paranoia deepened. I found myself checking every corner of the room, every reflection over and over, terrified of what might be lurking just beyond sight. One night I stood before the bathroom mirror, staring into my own eyes, willing myself to see only myself. But then, something changed. Out of the corner of my vision, I saw movement. The reflection shifted. The painted figure's eyes, black and gleaming, turned toward me. Frozen, I couldn't look away. For a terrifying moment, the eyes in the mirror weren't mine. They belonged to the stranger. The eyes watched me. And then, just as suddenly they were gone, I stumbled back, gasping, heart racing, trying to convince myself it had been a trick, a momentary lapse of reason. But the fear had taken hold. I was no longer alone. The painted figure was with me, waiting, watching, and I was losing control. I thought the nightmares, the whispers, the shadows, maybe even the eyes were all just tricks of my mind. Exhaustion, maybe, or the pressure of the commission pressing down on me too hard. But I was wrong. Terribly wrong. The moment I realized the portrait was alive was the moment reality itself began to unravel. It started small. I returned to my studio one evening, ready to continue work on a different piece. Anything to escape the oppressive presence of that one painting. But as I entered, my breath caught in my throat. The portrait was different. The painted eyes seemed sharper, more focused, as if piercing through the air toward me. I reached out instinctively, fingers trembling, and traced the edge of the canvas. That's when I felt it. A pulse, a heartbeat. No, not just a feeling, it was real. The painting was breathing, alive in a way I had no words for. Panicked, I grabbed a knife from the table, and in a desperate attempt to reclaim my sanity, I slashed at the canvas. But as I stepped back, heart pounding, I realized something worse than any nightmare. The portrait was untouched, not a single stroke disturbed, even more unsettling. The room seemed to darken, the shadows thickening around me as if the painting itself was swallowing the light. I didn't stop there. I tried hiding the canvas. I wrapped it in cloth, shoved it into a cupboard, locked it away. But the next morning it was back on the easel, perfectly displayed as if daring me to deny its power. Worse, the studio became a house of horrors. Multiple copies of the portrait appeared overnight, not just on canvas, but in mirrors, glass surfaces, even photographs I hadn't taken. Faces stared at me from every corner, eyes unblinking, accusing, waiting. I screamed, shattered frames, tore down paintings, only to find them replaced again, pristine and taunting. I was trapped. Trapped inside a nightmare where nothing was real except the painting's gaze. Days blurred into nights. I stopped trusting my senses. Was I awake? Was this another dream? Was my mind finally breaking? The line between the portrait and me began to blur. One night, as I sat huddled in the corner of my studio, the silence shattered. A voice, low, gravelly, cold. Complete the masterpiece. I jolted upright, searching the room. "Who's there?" I whispered, voice cracking. The voice came again, clearer now, coming from the painting itself. "I am waiting," it said. "Your time is short." My blood ran cold. The figure in the portrait spoke. Not through my ears, but in my mind, twisting my thoughts, whispering dark promises and terrifying demands. "Complete the masterpiece," it insisted. "Only then will you be free." But free from what? Free for whom? I had no answers. Days passed, or was it hours? Time lost meaning. The figure's voice became a constant presence, haunting me, commanding me. It told me of a ritual, a ceremony to be performed on the next new moon, a dark event shrouded in shadows and silence. "Do this," it demanded, "and you will understand. Fail, and you will belong to the canvas forever." I was terrified, but also strangely compelled. The figure's influence seeped into every thought, every breath. It was no longer just a painting, it was a prisoner seeking release, and I was the key. I fought, struggling against the voice's pull. I tried to resist, tried to escape, but the portrait's power grew stronger. The studio was no longer a sanctuary, it was a prison, and I was its prisoner. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The portrait, the voice, the darkness creeping into every corner of my life, the whispers that clawed at my sanity, pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. I needed answers. I had to know the truth behind that stranger's gaze, the one who commissioned the painting and cursed my existence. I began searching. The local library, dusty archives, faded newspapers, anything that might hold a clue. What I found chilled me to my core. The portrait wasn't just any artwork. It was an ancient curse passed from one owner to another like a poison. Previous owners, artists, collectors, even ordinary people had vanished without a trace, or descended into madness so deep they were locked away, forgotten. Their fates all traced back to the same portrait. A single haunted face staring from the canvas, alive and watching. I found a name connected to the stranger, an artist from centuries ago who had vanished after painting a mysterious figure. Some said the figure was a demon, others a trapped soul. And the painting. It was the prison. The painted figure was no mere image. It was a tormented soul bound to the canvas, desperate to break free. I understood now. The entity sought release, and it had chosen me as its vessel. The curse was ancient, a dark ritual sealed within the paint and canvas, feeding on the life force of those trapped in its web. I had to stop it. But how? The old texts spoke of a ritual, one to sever the connection between the cursed soul and the living, to break the chains that bound it to this world. But the price was steep. The ritual demanded a sacrifice. The life force of the one attempting to free the soul. In other words, my life. I sat alone, heart pounding, staring at the portrait, the painted eyes watching, waiting. The voice echoed in my mind. Complete the ritual or be mine forever. I was trapped between two impossible choices. Sacrifice myself to end the curse and free the tormented soul, or refuse and live a slow descent into eternal torment, my mind unraveling until nothing of me remained. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a leaden shroud. Could I do it? Could I give up everything to end this nightmare? My fingers trembled as I prepared the tools, the old candles, the worn book of incantations, the chalk to draw the binding circle. I began the ritual as the night deepened, shadows flickering against the walls, the air thick with anticipation and dread. The portrait's eyes glowed with a terrible light. The voice spoke again, louder now, pleading, threatening. As I recited the ancient words, the studio seemed to collapse into chaos, shadows twisting, the air growing colder, the painted figure reaching out, desperate to stop me. I felt the life draining from my body, the sacrifice demanded in full. But with the final word, a burst of light shattered the darkness. Silence fell. The painting was blank, empty canvas staring back at me. The curse was broken, but I was changed, weakened, and forever marked by the darkness I had faced. I had chosen sacrifice, but the nightmare had ended. Or so I thought. The night of the ritual had come. The air in the studio was thick, heavy with silence and the smell of candle wax burning low. The shadows stretched like hungry fingers creeping along the walls, waiting. I felt every nerve in my body tighten. My hands trembled not from fear alone, but from the weight of what I was about to face. The portrait sat before me, blank canvas no more. The painted figure was back, more vivid, more real than ever, eyes blazing with fury and desperation. It knew what I was trying to do. It wasn't going down without a fight. I lit the candles arranged in the ancient circle, their flickering flames casting eerie shapes that danced in rhythm with my ragged breath. I began chanting the incantation, the old words heavy on my tongue, filled with power and dread. With every verse, the room seemed to pulse. The figure in the portrait twisted and writhed, the painted brushstrokes coming alive, turning into grasping hands and clawed fingers that reached toward me. "Complete me," it hissed, voice dripping with venom. "Become mine." I stumbled back, heart pounding, the air thickening with a cold so deep it felt like ice crawling beneath my skin. The shadows surged forward, swallowing the light from the candles. The painted figure's eyes locked onto mine. Time warped. Seconds stretched into eternity. In that moment, I realized the final truth. The entity wanted to trap me inside the canvas just as it was trapped, to swap places, to enslave another soul. My mind screamed for escape, but I forced myself to stand firm, clutching the ancient book close, the ritual words flowing faster now, stronger. The studio shook. Paint splattered like blood. The figure roared, a sound not of this world. Then silence. The candles flickered and died. I opened my eyes. The portrait lay shattered on the floor. The figure was gone. The room was still. But the victory felt hollow. I looked down and saw my reflection in the broken shards of glass. For a heartbeat, my eyes shimmered with something not my own. A flicker of the painted figure. Had I truly won? Or was I now part of the endless chain? Years later, long after I disappeared, a new artist would find that portrait, waiting, watching, ready to claim its next victim. The cycle begins again,